Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about secured cloud computing. We're talking about priorities. I'm going to roll it up to you, Brian. You talked about a lot of different things. Top priority for FedRAMP. I know you're wrestling that paper tiger to the ground. What else do you got going on there?
Well, we have multiple efforts going on, right? All of them complementary. Again, we're laying the foundation for modernizing the program through our automation efforts. Obviously, the big one and that's of concern for everybody probably watching is the transition from 853 Rev 4 to Rev 5. We completed our public comment period, received several hundred comments on the baselines. And so, just the fabulous team that I have over there at FedRAMP is working through to adjudicate those comments and then putting together the final baselines for the JAB approval. Of course, understanding that that's a touchy subject as well. We understand that the transition from one baseline to another is very complex and large in scope. And, we're also working out the transition plan that we're going to ask CSPs to adhere to. And then, it's continuing to leverage the insights of the agencies in the industry cybersecurity community. This is a multifaceted issue. And just because we don't see something doesn't mean it's going on. So, it's that continued outreach that, the interaction with our industry partners and with our agency partners to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball.
Right. I remember when you all did that JAB Interact, got a lot of good input. I think that's really important. Chris, top priority. We'll get to lessons learned in a minute for Quest at this point this year.
And sure, if you talk to different individuals in the federal team at Quest, they'll have different priorities because they're agency focused and agency specific.
Of course.
Our team being the technologists, we're very focused on delivering our ability to help an agency move to manage to secure both their on-prem to hybrid and cloud native operating environments. Applications and services may change over time, but there's certain core fundamental things that actually have to work as advertised. So when we talk to an agency, the first thing we try to understand is, one, how are you planning to meet the current crop of executive mandates, for instance? Those things deal with securing our nation. And quite frankly, if you just watch the news, it's painfully obvious that a lot of us are ill prepared, whether it's personally in your home network, whether it's an agency network or a corporate network. It's clear to see that there's a lot of work to do. When you look at the executive orders, quite frankly, and you break down all the different components, even if you break down zero trust, there's four things that always come to mind for me. And that is, one, do we actually know our users intimately? Who's on our network? What are they doing? Do we understand the data? Nick talked about the fraud in the network, in healthcare, for instance, and how Snowflake addresses that. And when you think about all the data across all these platforms, and as Dr. May said, can we collaborate, talk to different agency partners? I remember the formation of DHS came about because of the fact that we couldn't collaborate and communicate as a country from an agency perspective to protect the country. So understanding the data, where it is, who has access to it, and how do we provide applications access to that data safely is very important. The third thing I think about is the number of nodes or endpoints that are interconnected across these government networks. That is daunting, quite frankly. And that's where, I think John talked about that, for instance, from a Palo Alto perspective of, how do you actually protect an endpoint, for instance? How do you know the right packets going to the right destination, for instance? And as Dr. Mays talked about, that machine-to-machine cooperation or communication, that speaks to APIs. I don't know of anybody that's now obsessed, for instance, about the application ports per se, as we used to in the old days. It's now, what are the APIs being used, for instance? What service level integrations are actually going on? For a data application to work across multi-cloud and C2E, for instance, you've got to have some relative confidence that the right user, the right data, the right endpoint, for instance, and the API in use are all being used in the correct manner. So for us, the top priority is to help our federal agencies actually work within those architectural models to deploy zero trust, to give them access to both what they have in the legacy information databases and legacy systems, but move them forward into a cloud native infrastructure platform where they can get infrastructure platforms and software as a service in a service model, quite frankly, that will deliver the next generation of computing services to both our citizens as well as those who work within our federal agencies. Tall order, but that's what we're going to be working on.
Great focus. I'm going to ask the three federal members here. Top lesson learned. Mike, start with you. Number one lesson learned.
I think the number one lesson learned from us realistically is that allowing human individuals to do configurations in cloud services allows for variance across those cloud services. And oftentimes those variants happen manifest themselves in one of two ways. The application or the service that you're trying to deliver doesn't perform as you expect, or number two, there's some cybersecurity vulnerability that's exposed because configuration settings weren't set the proper way. So for us, as much as possible, automating deployment of applications and services across cloud services, scripting virtually everything, making it all infrastructure and services as code so that the code can be reviewed and not the actual individual who's doing the application settings. That's the biggest lesson for us, I think, going forward. And I think we're making great strides in delivering on that common CI/CD pipeline. But that's one of the biggest lessons learned, I think, from our cloud journey so far.
Good focus of attention. Ed, top lesson learned.
I think the top lesson learned is monitoring from a cyber perspective, watching what's happening in your environment, looking for potential data loss, those kinds of things. Obviously, tracking spending, but an example I'll tell you is we had something happen in our O365 tenant. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was one of those things that we were monitoring, and we actually saw it and we alerted Microsoft, and it was just, it gave us a lot of confidence that what we were doing was right and was going to protect us. That was huge. I mean, because I will tell you, about 3 years ago, we didn't have that. And so we're in a much better place. So I think data loss prevention, looking at that, monitoring in terms of security is definitely, important.
Keeping that environment secure. Brian, you're sitting in the catbird seat. Number one lesson learned you'd like to communicate to the community?
Continued collaboration. Absolutely. I touched on it a little bit previously. This is a multifaceted issue. The things that our agency partners are seeing is not necessarily what we're seeing. The industry partners have a different perspective as well. And, we're orchestrating that in FedRAMP to make sure that, that the cloud services are secure and that agencies can adopt them. And the only way we can do that is through continued outreach, continued collaboration, speaking to industry groups, agency organizations, et cetera. And, and I have to say that, all the stakeholders that I interface with and at the PMO interfaces with are all incredibly supportive, even leadership at TTS and through OMB.
Yeah, and the FedRAMP program office doing a fantastic job on the outreach. Really do appreciate it. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, and we're going to talk about painting a picture of the future. Chris, we're going to start with you. A couple of years from now, what does it look like at that point?
Honestly, from a future perspective, it's hard to put ourselves out there, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. That's why I only went 2 years.
So look, in the future, I fully expect to have our data collected, consolidated, analyzed, normalized, literally how we will feed the machine that will drive intelligence that will help us in every area of our lives. That sounds ominous, for some people scary, but we're doing it right now, whether we like it or not. There's a great book I read earlier. It's a big, fat book, and it's called, it's based on surveillance capitalism, and it's where we are, quite frankly. So being able to control how my data is collected, how that data can then help me in my life, whether it's health, whether it's finance, relationships. We do that now in decision support systems. We do that now when we ask Outlook to find a meeting that everybody can attend at the same time. We're using data right now in every aspect of our life. The difference is that we don't control it, and we cannot determine exactly what the outcome of that data will be for us individually. So in the future, I fully expect, whether it's the Amazon platform or the Microsoft platform, whether it's Snowflake or whether it's Palo Alto protecting where that data is going and how it gets there, for instance, I fully expect data to be at my beck and call. And if we don't deliver on that, that'll be a severe, not just a disappointment, but I think a catastrophe for humanity. We have to figure out as a society how we're going to make data and the information systems we have enabled to really support society, to support the individual, and especially the citizen in the way we actually do our functions within the country.
And serve it up in a way that is a great user experience as well. John, how about Palo Alto Networks? Fast forward, what's the demand signal out there from your customers? What are you looking at in 2 years?
Well, I mean, I think the trends that we've seen over the past couple of years, I don't see those trends really changing over the next 2 years towards in the future. And specifically, what I'm referring to is the notion of agencies obviously trying to become more cloud centric in terms of moving more things out of traditional data centers, but also becoming and just continuing to become intentionally multi-cloud. And when I say intentionally multi-cloud, it's not a matter of like, well, we had a bunch of groups that kind of went off and did their own thing, and now we have things in Azure and AWS and GCP, but instead to do that with a purpose. And that purpose we see from a lot of for a lot of rationale. One of them is just having a better negotiating position with those vendors. If they know that you can move assets to different providers, they've got much more of a incentive to work with you on pricing and contractual terms. There's also certain vendors that may have stronger services in given areas, like Google Cloud, for example, has very good machine learning capabilities. Perhaps you want to take advantage of that, but you also want to take advantage of Amazon for their infrastructure as service. So that notion of things being intentionally multi-cloud, including your own private clouds that you run, I mean, those are not going away, even as we move everything to AWS and so forth. I mean, there's still a substantial amount of compute that's going to live in private cloud environments and will for a long time. And things like containerization and Terraform and these other technologies allow you to have a commonality of the way that you manage those resources across those different physical locations. And so for us, and really the whole bet for us in Prisma Cloud is that people need security tooling that spans across all those places and spans across the time horizons from the time that you design that infrastructure as code or that container image until the time that you're building it and deploying it and running in production.
And we really do appreciate all the work that you all are doing. Nicholas, you all are kind of striped across all these multi-clouds already. What does it look like for Snowflake and the Snowflake experience 2 or 3 years from now?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Luke. I'm going to make this a little bit more blunt, I'm going to combine comments made by John and Chris, right? Because Chris, a little while ago,
he teed you up there.
You know what? We're going for it. Chris talked about endpoints and APIs in software and how we're interacting with applications and moving data around. And then a little bit later, John was talking about some of the multi-cloud stuff. I think really where we're going to end up is that we're not really going to know. We'll know because we're the technology geekery behind the scenes, but the majority of our users won't know what cloud they're even operating on. They won't know where the data is coming from that they're using to make better decisions. They'll just know that they're getting the latest and greatest that our architecture can provide to them. And I think that's really the key here. Everything is going to be an endpoint or an API. If I need a machine learning algorithm, maybe I go to Google. If I've got some very low light code that I want to run in Lambda, I go to AWS for that. If I've got this sort of way of shopping around and find the best individual microservices that we can put to bear on our problems, that's the real promise, I think, of the cloud getting to that point. Snowflake's working on some of that, connecting data in AWS with Azure, with GCP, making all that available to users and collaboration across agencies. But really, I think the entire IT industry is going to go that way, because why would you reinvent the wheel when you can just drive somebody else's car? That's probably a great way to look at it. And the other thing is the outcome of that. Once we've got that built, what do we look for in our society? What's going to hit us is going to be better evidence-based decision making. Raw data becomes information which is then applied to a problem and a decision is made. That is the process all of us go through every day. And the better information we have, the better data we start with, the better those decisions will be. We've got laws that are telling us to be more evidence-based. This is how I think we'll get there, Luke.
Fantastic, and really do appreciate that. Brian, you passed Rev 5. You're fairly fully automated. I think you guys are under 6 months now to turn these things around. What's it look like in 2 to 3 years? Are we going to get down to 4 months, 2 months? What's the future look like?
So in 2 to 3 years, I envision the FedRAMP program to have our automation capability operational. So packages are submitted. We don't have assessors running through 800-page SSPs anymore. We have web APIs established, so cloud service providers are pushing their Kanban scans into our platform, and that information is being dashboarded in a little more frequency than the agencies are getting it now. Now they're getting it once a month with regards to the JAB. We want to see that frequency increase, so it gives the agencies better evidence, like Nicholas talked about, to make decisions. And so again, it's the work that's done up to this point, and we're being very slow and deliberate on how we automate, because we're setting the foundation for the program for the next 5 to 10 years. But I would expect in the next 2 to 3 that our automation capability will be operational, and we'll see. So our authorization timelines for the JAB are around 4.5 months at this point.
Wow.
There's going to be a point where we can't go any lower, because we have to put the rigor behind the assessment. But there are still gains to be made. And same with the on the agency authorization side, looking at how to, increase the velocity there without sacrificing the veracity of the assessment.
Right, no doubt. You get to a point of diminishing returns, but you don't have to burn as many calories to do it, which I think the community would really appreciate. So thank you for everything that you're doing there. Ed, you talked about zero trust. You talked about a contract you're going to lay out there. Let's assume, you're never done with zero trust, but your contract's out there. You're in a multi-cloud environment. If you look around 2 to 3 years from now, what are you expecting to see?
Well, I think Nicholas hit on it. I'd like to see an environment, an AI-powered platform, if you will, that allows us to create, understand, and act on knowledge effectively, right? For instance, having a cloud services brokerage, we want to be able to architect quickly and dynamically and get the best delivery, fastest delivery for the lowest cost, and, without having a lot of human interaction. And I think that's going to be, it's going to drive our value stream. And, if we can secure that and move it fast, I think that's where we want to be in a couple of years.
Right. And it's, again, focused on that automation. I think that's really important. Mike, I guess in 2 to 3 years, obviously C2S will be sunsetted, C2E fully realized. You're way up the value chain. What are you thinking about? If I'm a software developer, in the IC, what can I expect to have as far as goods and services at my disposal?
I'll make a potentially bold prediction, but I would say, and I think
we love bold predictions here, Mike.
It's everything is code. No longer do we have network engineers. No longer do we have system admins. Everything is code. If you're the traditional network jockey that jumps on a console, command line, your days are numbered. If you're a system admin who's building servers, your days are numbered. Everything becomes code. And that gets us a lot of benefits and consistency, proper cybersecurity. We know the way things are deployed. Brian mentioned automation, fully supportive of, automating the cybersecurity and the assessment process. These are the things that get us to speed of mission, is automating everything so that we know there's a consistently deployed application and service throughout our cloud service providers. And then Nick obviously focused kind of at the end of that as to making decisions. So you have automated machines and automated processes. You're being fed huge amounts of data, not only by the applications themselves that are running, by the Internet of Things and the sensors that we have out there. And somewhere on the back end is the AI engine that's pulling all of that together and sifting through the data. And I think it's going to begin to tee up decisions for humans. But ultimately, we want that engine to make some subset of decisions for humans, because it can make those decisions at scale. Now, I think that the question of ethical AI bridges into here. Like, what are the decisions we're allowing the machines to go ahead and make versus what are the decisions we want them to tee up for a human? I will tell you from a cybersecurity perspective, however, we want those AI engines to make decisions at the speed at which they're seeing the threats come in, because we just don't have enough time and enough people to analyze all those. And so we've got to craft the framework by which we say, this is the boundary within which we want the AI engine to go ahead and make decisions. Beyond this, tee it up for an analyst to come in and take a harder look.
Automation is the path to goodness. And we need to find the needle in the stack of needles, right? This has been a fantastic show, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for this program. I'd like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.